Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Breathing Body podcast. This podcast invites you to meet your body in a deeper and more meaningful way and to find your way back home. We explore tools and practices, share stories and experiences about how we can say yes to the body we inhabit. And that's the most beautiful project life has to offer. I call it self-love. My name is Flurina and I'm your host, and I'm so happy that you are here. Today's episode is another one of what I call my Root Teachers series. In 2017, I went to Goa to do a yoga teacher training with Helen Noakes and her team. Helen was also on a podcast, episode 5, I believe. And on that training, we had a fabulous guest teacher, Gary Carter. And I honestly can't put in words what happened with me when I sat there in India on the sandy Shala ground and witnessed how my own horizon got pulled wide open, and I came to a knowledge that my body is so much more I would have ever thought it could be or it is. Yes, studying with Gary is breathtaking, and so is this episode. So let me tell you a little bit more about this man, Gary Carter. Gary Carter brings so much to this world with his over 35 years of experience in physical training, anatomical study, and bodywork practices. He created a movement training called myofascial movement training and founded the Natural Bodies Center in 1991 to teach, train, and encourage kinesthetic awareness, ease of movement, efficient body use in exercise, sport, and many movement discipline. And is one of the first people in the UK to bring tensegrity and the fascial aspects to yoga and training systems. Gary trained and taught with Tom Myers, who you might know from Anatomy Trains. And he studied with yoga teachers such as Mary Stewart and John Sturck, and after a brief time with Wanda Scaravelli as well in Italy. He also studied in Jiu-Jitsu, Qigong, Jine Zhang, and craniosacral therapy. Gary has been and is teaching nationally and internationally for various organizations and university, and recently has been lead dissector and designer with the Fascial Net Plastination Project in Germany with the Günther von Hagen's team, who you might or probably know from the Body Worlds exhibition. And they created the world's first plastinated fascial human. Gary lives and teaches in Brighton in the UK and is consistently exploring, studying and practicing with talented and inspired people from all backgrounds of movement, research and manual therapy. And I hope you will enjoy this episode, and I'm so much looking forward to hearing from you, reading your thoughts and comments. And as always, if you do enjoy this podcast and did enjoy this episode, then leave a review, leave a 5-star review, share it with all your friends, WhatsApp channels, social media. That's such an immense support for me to keep this project going. I send you lots of love and enjoy. Welcome, Gary, on the podcast. Huge welcome.
Good to see you, Flurina.
And I find it exciting. Every episode is exciting to record, but this one is, when I was tuning in before myself, is actually really, really exciting. And I thought, I'm not sure how much I told you, but in a way, you know, all of what I'm doing today and how my path really emerged and unfolded started with meeting you. That's just, it's a fact. And you are one of what I call my root teachers. And Helen was the third guest on the podcast. I also count her as one of my root teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels so special to share with my audience a conversation with one of those people who so inspired and not just inspired, curved or shaped my path.
Well, it's been really amazing to see that path grow as well. You know, since that very first time that we met, and then you then attending the long training that we ran as well, the myofascial movement course, and then from there you moving into what you're doing and the osteopathy. It's been incredible to see that growth and that development in you. And also, the thing that I really noticed with you as well was when it came to being on the course, something changed in your ability to understand everything. And you grew in that course, and you saw something quite specific, I think. And then I could see that your life plan had already started forming, and that was remarkable to watch.
Yes, that's so wonderful that you say that, because that's partly exactly what I'd love to talk with you today about, I wish, my deepest wish for the world is that as many human beings as possible may they experience how their body can teach them, right? And let's go back. So I met you in 2017, Gary. That was in Goa when I was on my yoga teacher training. And I will never forget that moment. It was a really hot afternoon. It was Wednesday afternoon. I've written it into my diary. And we were sitting in the Shala, and you were teaching us about the microscopic structure of fascia. You were taking us into these images and videos of really the structure of collagen fibers. We talked about double helix and spirals and fluids. And I remember how I sat there in deep awe. And I remember that tears were rolling down my cheeks, and I couldn't ask a question, not because I didn't have one, but I was so deeply touched that my body was so much more than I would have ever thought it was or it could be. And yeah, that's what I'd love to explore with you today. It's huge questions, but what is that more which I think you very much convey to people, and how learning about that, how that can change the way we move and we use our body. Where to start?
Where to start? I mean, the interesting thing is that, you know, the more people that I've worked with, because I've taught all around the world in all sorts of different settings and to different types of studios and training courses and manual therapy courses and so on. And with a huge amount of people that I've met and worked alongside, and also had the privilege to practice with, because as you know, and then some of the guys that are on the course that are running your course in Goa are very good, close friends of mine that I spent a lot of time over many, many years exploring movement practices and work based on these patterns. And the thing that is commonplace is that everyone really knows this stuff anyway. They know their body. I can't assume that I know better than them. But what we can do is take them in and just show them this landscape that exists, and then leave them to play in it. Because that's really key. Because we get a lot of trainings that are out there, a lot of people sort of suggesting that they know better, and that you can only come to our course because we know what we're talking about, and then we'll hint something at you, and then you have to come on our course. And this is just something that we just need to keep giving away. And usually we find that person does know it. They know it as an instinct. It doesn't matter what walk of life they've come from, because we're born into this thing, and it's there and it's talking back to us. So I think the way that we've been schooled a little bit with it has kind of shaped the way that we think about it. And that's just the way that, you know, Western anatomy has gone to try and understand the body. And there's nothing wrong in that. They've done it the way that they've done it, and they did it the best way that they could. The person probably that was closest to understanding the most of it was Leonardo da Vinci, who had, even in my years of graphics when I was a teenager and even at school, I was researching his work and Michelangelo's work and so on, because these were huge inspirations to me in my work. And I think Da Vinci was probably the closest to getting to that kind of understanding, but he wasn't necessarily interested in turning it into an anatomical thing. He was an inventor and so on as well. So, then the medical world made their explorations, but some of them, they made their explorations 50 to 100 years after Da Vinci had found the same thing, but then it got officially recognized. So, as things have grown from there, we just kind of fill in the gaps and show you the stuff that's in between sometimes, and help people understand sense and feeling about themselves. And, I've worked with multiple dancers, come from martial arts background and different levels of competition. I think people that go into sports, whether it's martial arts or any other kind of competition sport, where you're taken to a certain edge in yourself, you learn to feel something about you that is really hard to describe to anybody else. And it's a unrecognizable knowing. I mean, you kind of know this from dance as well, because I know a lot of people, and had, ex-partners that were performing dancers that, were out there in the world of, high level performance and so on. But there's kind of an unspoken knowing about something that goes on in the inside that each person's got their own unique experience of. And yet once we connect to that, you just know. It's so hard to describe that. You just know. And that's the thing, is that we start working with people. I train people. I'm still training people now. I've got clients now that I'm back in Brighton over the last 4 years that I used to see many, many years ago. And the consistency of working with people and having integrity and consistency with people, rather than just chopping and changing all of the time, is really key, because you can see how they're moving into that place in themselves, and then gradually there's less words used in the teaching. And probably one of the finest teachers that I've ever come across that has that quality without using language at all is Rupert Johnson. And, Rupert's one of the finest people I've ever worked with in terms of not using words so much. And it's such an elegant way of understanding the body, because we've got lots of teachers out there that just verbalize so much that you've got no idea, because you get lost.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing to be around that experience, because we know it, we live it. Some people are busier in their bodies than others, busier in their mind than others, but there's a point where we can just drop them in and then leave them to wallow in it for a while, and all of a sudden they get really curious about this thing that they're moving. So if we can show the map from underneath every now and again, peeking under the skin, we can then create a language for that landscape to some degree.
Wow, you're saying so potent, important words and open windows and doors. Let's untangle that a little bit more. I'm so glad that you partly kind of corrected and reminded all of us that it's not about learning something new, because we all know that what you teach, but it's about maybe helping a person's whole system to remember, or to tune into something which almost got kind of covered over with literally other movement patterns, but also just kind of life stuff. And I guess that's exactly what happened in that moment when I met you in Goa, right? I couldn't understand with my mind why I was touched, or why that made me cry, but it was almost a sense of coming home, because finally that's it, Gary. Finally, someone would speak a language which my body understood without having to rationalize it. I feel what happens.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to the body. And once you speak to the body, you get to a point where you see the intellectual brain. In a way, the intellectual brain kind of gets a little overwhelmed. So what it has to do is melt. And once that happens, the person's body just starts to make sense of it. And then there's this other language that starts occurring within them. And you see it. That's the thing, is that, there they go. I know now I don't need to do very much with them, because they're the one that's much more intelligent around it than I would ever think I could be with them. Yes. All I can do is just, there's the map, let's go, and then let's dance together with it. And then I step out the way, because the job is done and it's theirs. And that can happen relatively quickly.
Let's dive a little bit more in there, you said the words, we kind of enter a territory of unspoken knowing, that insight, that innerness, that whole, I would guess, say, world of pure sensation, right? And constant fluid interchange movement. And then you also said how, you support people to move into that place where suddenly words just have to swim away because there are not more words. But maybe for listeners for whom that is all quite a new concept, innerness, inside, that's the mystic about it. But what is that place? Moving into that place. What are we moving into, Gary?
Well, there's an element of space that we move into. Of course, we move into the space around us always. That's always happening. And there's a sense of internal space. I mean, we haven't got a lot of space inside the system, and yet it's always spoken about. But when you kind of get into the structure, you start to realize that things are very well organized and put together quite closely. There aren't the kind of spaces that you see in joints in the way that illustrations are done around them, and yet there's a joint space. And when you linger in a joint space, if it's balanced all the way around it, you feel like you've got endless capacity for motion. And leading someone towards that and educating that individual to find that takes some time, because a lot of people are they're kind of individual muscle oriented, and sometimes that's necessary. But if they're individually muscularly oriented, then it's likely to take them to kind of one side of the joint, if I just talk about that simply. And it can generate more loading through that joint in one region than we would want. And that can be the thing that holds that individual back. The problem is when they're then challenged and they're trying to train harder, work harder, do something different, maybe move towards a yoga pose further and all that kind of stuff, whatever it is that they do, they will likely default back to the pattern that they know best to keep doing it with. And it's the thing that keeps holding them back. So what we do is we sort of step back out of that and then give them a different vision. And for a while, as you appreciate, because we've all been there, and I've seen that happen with you and everyone that was on those trainings, is that there's a point where all of a sudden their eyes kind of glaze over because they realize they're dealing with something that's more three-dimensional.
Yes.
And they get a three-dimensional sensation of what's going on, and then into areas that are unusual for them. The body knows where these things are. It's just that they've gone a little quiet and the nervous system's favored other places. So we bring them away from the place they favor into the unusual, and then gradually make that the usual. So everything sort of drops to normality. This is what it needs to do. So you've got this system that can balance itself in all directions. And as it does so, it feels extraordinary. So,
Absolutely.
Two words I've just used, normality and extraordinary, both of those things overlay each other.
Yeah, that's true. It's wonderful that the extraordinary actually is in what is our very normal. If we allow, I want to say the space, but no, if we allow, I don't know, maybe it's more if we allow a curious enough mind to, and if we trust, if we have the courage, I mean, it doesn't need courage to go to any class or course where it's maybe less about copying a teacher, but.
Absolutely. And, I was just thinking then, as you were saying, is that this is available to everyone. It's part of the birthright of our system. However, everyone gets it differently. So, I will work with someone that might be a boxer, someone that's a high-level competition fighter, where they're not going to be too interested in backing up too much and softening up their system, but we can actually make it so much more efficient. Right the way through to someone that is deeply somatic in themselves, and then there's even more to go there, and then the spectrum in between. So there's a whole world there, and I think as movement teachers and practitioners, we actually need to be very well versed in understanding all of the dynamics of the different aspects of movement.
Absolutely.
As much as we can be. Not everyone is interested in that, so you've got some people who just specialize a certain way. I don't know where my specialization is anymore with that. It's just that, because I have my own practice, the way that I move, I still train. I'm training a lot more than I ever did. And then, as you know, I even feed that information through to my father. who is a masters athlete, 87, and he's world champion 2 times over in hurdles. He's a sprinter, still at it, still going over hurdles. He's just broken the British record for indoor 60 meters. And what he does is he just takes the information. All it does is it makes 5 minutes difference to his training, and that's all. So I'm not saying that I'm going in there and we're making big changes to everyone. Is that no, they know better than us, and all they've got is just that little bit more information to add to what they do, and it shifts and shapes. But he's, I've drawn a lot of influence and inspiration from him because he sees these things and he trains people from multiple age ranges in different levels of athletics and constantly gets them to their personal bests out of his own experience and watching and learning people. And he's not trained to do it, but he knows best than most. He even ended up on one of the British Fascist Symposiums and went off and did one of these sort of running sessions with the guy that's involved in a particular Olympic team with certain running techniques. And Dad came back and he said, seen all this before, I could teach this guy a thing or two, and just left it. But he's quite humble with it. He just walked away and said, it's not my job to. And I just thought, okay, yeah, I get it. Because I've watched him move and there's something quite unique that comes up. And he just imparts that to his colleagues. And it is, again, small words, little amount of contact, tiny touch, and then they're off. And there's the artistry, I think, in it.
Yes. You say artistry, and I would tell, whenever I share with people about what I learned from you, I started calling it the art of creating space. I feel you taught me the art of creating space. And you mentioned what you just said, that innerness, what is it? It is internal space. And isn't it fascinating to see how we then all take that into different directions, right? Ended up where I'm starting to work with women with eating disorder, and how through a movement practice can we actually find, that's why working for you was a healing for me. I would be able to find the same lightness and spaciousness through movement rather than starving myself. Gary, that was the biggest game changer, bigger than digging in all my childhood traumas for me.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Fantastic. And I love that, the art of making space. It's I'll borrow that, but I'll quote you.
Yeah, the art of creating space. That's what you stand for me. Fantastic. Gary, you mentioned your father, and I feel it's time to go back some years. Take us back. I shared with you what, for me, meeting you was that moment when I had that awe moment, and I entered a different path or direction. And take us back how many years it needs to when. What was one, or what were those key moments for you on your journey?
Well, I mean, I'd always been active, and I kind of grew up in Hertfordshire in a village which is surrounded by forest and woodland. So as kids, when we were growing up, we were just left. It was those classic days of going out at 8 o'clock in the morning. You don't come home till the sun goes down, and the parents got no clue what you're doing in the meantime. And so there was me and some friends, and we would call a particular routine every morning our daily exercise, where we would clamber around certain trees. And we had to do these things on our way through to where we wanted to get to. We had to do a series of tasks all the time to be able to manage our environment. So I always remember, and I think the last time I went back to that wood was with my dog before my dog died. And it's the thing that I just sat there, and I sat on the ground, and I could smell the smell of that earth as it was when I was a child. And the thing that, first of all, I thought I'd lost my sense of smell, because standing up, of course, as children, you're closer to the earth and you're inside the foliage. But as an adult, you're further away from it because the nose is further away from the ground. So I just sat down, smelt the earth and just hung out there for a bit and had a feel for what it was like to be back in that place. And that really shaped my world, really. So I was always active. My father was always an athlete of some sort anyway. So I would go to his running track that he still runs at now, when it was an old running track when I was a child. And I was fascinated by these people running and jumping and long jumping and going over hurdles. And the smell of that environment was just so magical. And I got involved in martial arts and judo and grappling techniques and learning to use the body that way with somebody else's body mass against you. And I then got in. I used to be a cyclist. I got involved in cycling. There's something about that just really hit the sweet spot for me. And I became a competition cyclist and got involved in a lot of competition. We had a fantastic coach that was part of a pro team that was kind of coming into our team. And he was teaching us the techniques that he was teaching the top pros. And he was talking to us about elasticity of the spine and how the body had an elastic component to it. Now, we were teenagers, so we're looking at the 70s, and this Neil Gardner was his name, is no longer with us anymore. And he was brilliant. He was the game changer for me because it changed the way I focused on my body's movement. And anyway, many years later, I had quite a nasty accident that stopped me from riding, and I missed my slot to go into kind of a high-level team. So I could have backed away because my fitness level had dropped a lot. It was a cost. It cost a lot of money to repair the bike. I had to sell all the other bikes that I had to repair that one and everything. So I was a year out, basically, of my scheduling. So my father got me lifting weights. I just started training with weights so I could do something on the spot because I couldn't move around a lot. I couldn't ride a bike. I was seriously concussed and my balance was out for quite some time. It took a long time to ride again. And the weight training really made a difference to me, and I felt something in the quality of the movement and started training with an old friend of mine I grew up with. And we really got fascinated by the fact that you could change the body shape by putting different loads through it. And you could also balance it as well. So some people just train the body and just hope it gets somewhere, but you can train it intelligently. So I'd read a lot about that. And then somebody passed me a book called Education of a Bodybuilder, which was Arnold Schwarzenegger's first book when he was 25. At the time, he was retiring from bodybuilding. And he was talking about how the mind was building the body. And then my father introduced me to a bodybuilder that he was influenced by, a man called Frank Zane, who was in California. And Frank Zane was all about the mind building the body, the mind process of movement. And that really stuck with me. And that became my methodology from there on in. So I also worked in graphics as a graphic designer and 3D model making. And this was before computers. So we're using scalpels a lot and visualizing. And I can see in 3D. So that was something that was very easy for me to understand the body through, being able to see it in 3D. And in the days that I was training around bodybuilders going into competition, you could see every fiber of their body move when they were training. So if someone was, say they're training the biceps, for instance, you could see how the calves had to respond to that. So you had this sort of tensional relationship around the body adapting to load. So that, you could see straight away it wasn't so much about being able to isolate, but you had to bring attention to certain areas whilst allowing the rest of the body to adapt to it. And that just became my life. Eventually, I ended up leaving that world because I knew what I wanted to do, because I competed in bodybuilding a couple of times, in natural bodybuilding, which is where the name of my studio came from, Natural Bodies. And I met a man in Brighton who became my trainer, who had been a professional bodybuilder and messed himself up on steroids and came back again when he was told he would never compete again because he injured his spine. And he was coming from the attitude of the mind, of visualization and so on. So we spoke each other's language, really, the unspoken language, as it were. And he took me into a level of training that was quite remarkable. And I can still remember to this day the feeling of how those first sessions felt. And every time I work with someone and I train, I go back to that place in my mind and we start there, because I think it's really important to always understand your beginnings and the roots of where you've come from. And my sort of center grew from that. I studied in Shiatsu because I wanted to get manual. So I studied in Shiatsu, also studied the yoga practice that you know of, because my girlfriend at the time was studying to be a Pilates teacher, and she brought home Vander Scaravelli's book when it first came out. And I read that book, but not realizing it was a yoga book. I was just fascinated by the philosophy. And then many years later, I came across someone that had been working with Vander, and that was the thing that changed my world. And that was in 1990, 91 or something, 92 maybe. And that was John Sturck, and Pete Blackaby and John Sturck, those two individuals. And they were both osteopaths, both influenced by Vander's work. John was the first person that started mentioning the word fascia. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. And I thought, well, how am I going to learn more about this? So then I studied in cranial sacral therapy. And so my introduction to the fascial world was that it's a fluid medium, but it made sense to my hands because in my shiatsu treatments, I was feeling something under my hands that my shiatsu teachers couldn't describe to me because I was feeling something different to what they were suggesting. And it was only when I met the cranial work that made sense to me. Through that, I met Tom Myers. So we brought Tom Myers down to Brighton to do a very short lecture. And he was introducing even the concept of the anatomy trains, but there was no book at that time. And I ended up training with him after that. And we brought Tom to the UK and running the first ever anatomy trainings in the UK down in Brighton. I ended up then studying with him and teaching alongside him for a while. And at some point realized that actually Tom's understanding of how to interact with the fascia was very different in terms of structural integration compared to how it was from the cranial work, which is where this sort of fluid aspect of it exists. And I thought, well, actually, there's a different way to meet this, because in those days, this fascia thing was more about just stretching it. And I always felt that there's an elastic return in it, which is what we understood in Vander's work, always. And that understanding came about many years later from Robert Schleip's team in his research that, yes, there are these properties that have it retract and it's slightly contractile. And you know, I thought, yeah, we knew that as a feeling, but it had to be confirmed by someone many years down the line. So that's where this whole world of that stuff started, really, for me.
Wow. I always enjoy, I mean, I know not everything, but I know your history background, but it's always interesting to hear it again, because each time you hear something with different ears. And actually what I wasn't, let's unwind, let's go back a little bit. And there are 2 points I want to dive a little bit deeper in and to share to hear what was it, what we explored there. You said in Brighton at one point when you met that other, what was this, an other guy who trained weights with you, with the mind and visualization?
Carl Lloyd is his name.
Yeah, so because, I so agree with you how our mind and how visualization, how the power of images in any movement practice. One practice I love to do is literally lying in semi-supine on my back and just going through imaginative landscapes, and you can just watch how space arises and then move into that space. And I'm really curious, Gary, what was different in the way he worked with you, or what was it what you discovered there? What did visualization means to you?
Yeah, well, it was everything that I'd have read about, but I couldn't find anyone that would actually teach that to me, because in those days, a lot of the competitive bodybuilders would always keep their secrets to themselves. So, you know, you had to be within that world to really understand it. And there was a guy in London when I trained, because I trained for many years at a gym in Walthamstow, which is one of the finest gyms I've ever trained in, with a brilliant team of people there. And a guy called Russell Gaisley, who now lives in Portugal. I met with him just recently in Portugal. And I've not seen him since those days, which was the 80s. And he had a very intellectual way of training, very clever, but he also understood the visualization quality. And interestingly, my friend Carl, who I met, who I created Natural Bodies with, used to train in that gym long before we knew each other, but we were both in the same environment, which was weird. But so anyway, when I met Carl, he talked my mind into my body.
What do you mean with that?
It was the way that he was using his language. That's all I can say, really. He was, as I was going through the training, he could see where my habits were coming in an instant. He could see it. The moment I touched the bar, he could tell, because this was from the point of view of weight training and bodybuilding. So he could tell the way I approached it, what I was about to do. And then he took me to a different place in myself as to how I needed to approach this and then move. And then how the breath was the element that keyed to it, and then could be visualized how the structure needs to engage and contract and open. And you know, I hate to use the word because it's overused, to kind of embody it process. You know, we didn't use that word back then anyway. It was just, you're inside this tissue and you are now becoming that part of you. And can you feel what it's like to make that movement and engage with it rather than just force it around? And it was deeply sensory as a movement quality.
Wow. So it sounds he actually kind of managed or facilitate the bridge of you not just becoming one. That's what I see, rather than you seeing yourself doing the movement because it can be a different experience, right? We can do a movement, or I can actually, it's so difficult to find right words. Of course, I always am the movement, but it sounds like there was a shift of, you became, with osteopathy, it's a difference if you palpate any given joint, if you just kind of see it in between your hands, or there is also a sense of almost, what if I would become that knee or liver or head?
Absolutely. That's exactly it. That's the same with my manual therapy as well. It's the same. It's always ever done, is that you meet the tissue, you become the tissue. You know, you'd have to have a sense of really being in there. So this is exactly what he did. But then there's two elements to that, because you kind of had to really extend yourself into the weight, the object you're using. Now, these principles are used in Ki Aikido and so on, where, you know, especially Ki Aikido, where there's sword forms and so on, is that you project Ki. So you are through the object that you're with. So those elements stay there all the time. I teach and practice Qigong. So those elements are in there. And it was the same with the weight. It just, the breath, the movement, and the weight, pardon me, all become an extension of each other. And that's what happened. And it's been that way ever since.
And that's because the other big question I'll be sitting with my whole life is, what does body mean, and what does it mean to meet my body? Because I sometimes I hear myself saying, oh, I want to reconnect with my body on that or bad days, but then I'm never not connected. And from what you talked just now about, what does it mean to meet my body? It means to a sense of being in there, to just embrace the sensorium we are. Doesn't that mean meeting our body?
So there's an interesting dynamic to this, because I also used to race cars, and with a good friend of mine I grew up with, the guy that I used to start training with when we were really young, and we used to end up in the woods with when we were children. So he's still my friend now. We've known each other since we were about 3. And we designed and built race car engines to race minis. We used to do sprint events and so on. But there was a point where we would design and plan and organize the car setup so that we worked so much on it that when we drove it, we knew it and we could feel it. So when it came to then racing on specific circuits, we had a log book of how the car performed on each circuit and how we set it up for the specific circuits. So once we did that, we didn't have to worry about the car again, because we did all the setup, and then all we needed to do was get in it and drive it. And we knew its capabilities. And this question came up with a good friend of mine who's a dancer and one of the most elegant movers I've ever worked with, a guy called Christoph Lechner, who I'm still good friends with, and he appears on my sessions online as well. It's the same with this, really, because we condition it enough that, as you know, we are task-driven. So if I want to get my glass of water, excuse me, I'm not thinking about the anatomy that moves my arm. I just reach for the glass of water. But I've done enough work in my system that I know, and even I can see it out the corner of my eye, how much effort it takes for me to reach it and touch it. I don't have to think about everything that I'm doing. So the more we keep refining our system, which is exactly what happens in martial arts and Tai Chi and so on, yoga practices, hopefully, is that we're constantly refining it so that my body's meeting me all the time, but I don't have to really go and be overly aware of it, because it would distract me. And then I can go to my practice, meet myself, back up for a moment, feel how I contact the ground, and then work with refining some movements. Anyone that plays an instrument, anyone that's again, a martial artist, anyone that needs to go through a certain sporting pursuit. The guy that climbed El Capitan, have you seen the movie The Dawn Wall?
No.
He visualized his climb for over a year and climbed partway using ropes, because it's a free climb, but he climbed it different regions to understand all of the handholds and the footholds, came down from above to recognize them there, and then visualized at night. Every night he went to sleep visualizing every move, so that the day came where he would climb that mountain face, free climbing, and he did it seamlessly because it was mapped out in his body.
Wow.
He didn't have to think about his anatomy anymore. And this is it. It's the same. Otherwise, we can get too lost in this thing and get too bothered about how I'm going to move the minutiae of this all the time. And it just gets in the way.
Wow, that's fascinating. And it's that's what we can do. I just got really excited, Gary, and I thought, oh, a little light bulb moment when you said that, because sometimes I think I try so hard to meet my body, but actually, yes, why not? Maybe it's my body meeting me. Can you just summarize that again? So what was the key change there, which needs, or what is the stage we need that the body can meet me?
Well, I think we have to just back up for a moment and wait for it to come into contact with us again.
Yeah.
We can intellectualize it. And of course, a lot of people, there are a lot of people that think a lot. They use their brain a lot. We need those people in the world. And we might need to just have them drive their body a bit. So the body just has enough sensation so the mind and the body will meet each other. Yes. Some people have to have more sensation to feel than others. Some people can feel the lightest amount of movement in the body. Some people don't. And there's nothing wrong in that. It's just how it is. I can't make everyone the same. I was working with someone yesterday who's a martial artist as well. And we were working with certain movements. And I said, listen, we need to get you, can the mind now drop out of the way? Because he's going to that place in himself now. And then let's maintain this position. Because there is a good reason where certain postures, whether it be yoga or in martial arts, are held for a while and they stay static. Against what everybody else says and thinks about that stuff. They don't really understand what they're talking about when they say that. Is that there is time to hang out and wait in the same thing. And there's a point then where the body will go to the mind. And you can see it when that happens in that individual when you've worked with them enough. It's the nuance in the skin. It's the quality of their breath. It's the change in the eyes. It's whether there's a sheen of sweat that comes up. Something changes. And then all of a sudden you realize the two have connected. Then we go to the next place. And slowly you start putting it together, which generates motion.
And that is the practice. And yes, it needs commitment. And I think it needs that commitment to what you just said, to actually be able to back off, delay, inhibit, pause, break, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah. And, on the flip side, there is this interesting element. And my dear, dear, good close friend, who I can now call him Dr. Stephen Braybrook, who died last year, and he's going to get his doctorate posthumously. And his work and research was all about the mind and the mind moving the body. And we'd spent so much time exploring these ideas together. And if I can do even 1% of justice, I hope I can, in that work when we practice, because luckily to work alongside him with this work. And he just had a genius way of seeing what was going on. And he got it in a glimpse and just suggested a slight nuance to an individual. It might be what they do with their eyes, where their head is, what they've done with their lips. And their belief patterns start to change around what they thought they couldn't do, and all of a sudden it's what they can do becomes available, because he knows how the system's organized. So knew how the system was organized, and it was quite remarkable. So you've got these two elements where the mind's meeting the body, or the body's meeting the mind, or they're just meeting each other. And it's this beautiful process.
Yeah, and then that is wholeness, I feel, or awakening to the wholeness we have never not been, right? In osteopathy, obviously, we talk all the time about wholeness. And that's when you enter, I would say in practice, that's when a different sound enters the room, a different vibration, different landscape. That's when fluids on all different dimensions. Some people may think that's a bit woo, but I think it's real.
No, but you get this because, there's some people, a good friend of mine who's a shiatsu practitioner who I met, when I first started. He understood the quality of the texture of meridians when he touched them. And he understood that as a sound.
Absolutely.
And I see movement in sound. Some people see movement in color. Some people see music in shapes and so on. And that's always been the thing to me. So I kind of, it's a weird thing to say, but, I hear it when it's in the room. And it's a strange thing, some people don't get it. So I don't talk about it that much. It's not anyone's business really. It's the thing that makes it click for me.
I'm glad we went back to that moment of mind when you learned how mind programs body and figured out that it's maybe more our body meeting us rather than we have to meet the body. But we kind of stopped. You were talking about how in 1991 you met John Sturck. You met the work of Wanda Scaravelli, that were most intelligent approach to yoga. I would think. And that's when you entered or met the world of fascia, that fluid medium. And in these past 5 years, we briefly spoke about that before we hit the record button. You have done, or you witnessed an historical moment. And I would love if you share with the listeners what was it you were so busy with in these past 5 years? And
so for those that are familiar with the exhibition called Body Worlds, which is around the world of real bodies which have been plastinated. So these are donor bodies with the Professor Gunther von Hagens, who was the creator behind all of this, and he's got two organizations, one called the Plastinarium, which is in Guben in Germany, and then Body Worlds, where the head office is in Heidelberg in Germany. And the Plastinarium produces body specimens for medical universities around the world, and for exhibitions as well, and for Body Worlds. And so they're an educational organization. And then there's the exhibition, which is Body Worlds itself, which is another entity that is run by his ex-wife, Dr. Angelina Wally. So they're a really good team, and some of the finest people I've ever worked with in my life. These people, I've never seen anything like it before. However, there was a program to create the world's first ever fascial focused specimens that had never been created like this before. So we see all these kind of images in anatomy books of old. We see fascial cross sections in illustrations and so on. And as you know, the anatomy books of old, I've got that big tome here of Borgery and Jacobs. That's the 1800s book with lovely fascial illustrations. But somewhere after that era, the fascia was kind of missing. But purely because I think the research just wasn't able to go as far as it could do. And as you know, Andrew Taylor still proposed that it could go further, but realizing they're limited with their equipment. It's only when the equipment got better we could do different things with it. So anyway, there was an approach towards Body Worlds to see whether we could create pieces like this. And I went to the first ever Body Worlds in 2004 in London, and then wrote a very simple email to them saying, have you ever considered creating a fascial body in your plastination process? And probably about 6 months later, I got a very dry reply from them saying, thanks for your inquiry. It's far too complex. And then I think similar time, Dr. Robert Schleip had approached them and asked them a similar thing, but they were a bit more engaging with him because he was Dr. Robert Schleip in German, but also that they'd said, it's a similar thing. It's quite complex. We're not quite ready to do it yet. So a lot of time went by, and I think the right time went by because then all of us had gone involved in dissection. I studied with Gil Headley and Todd Garcia, and then continued doing a lot of work with Julian Baker and so on. So we mastered our fascial focused dissection skills until the day that Robert kept on pestering Body Worlds. And I think 2017, he had the conversation with them and they said, okay, we're willing to give it a try. And by then there was a team that had skilled. So 50 of us got together initially to do the first pieces, where we created about 9 specimen pieces that were purely supposed to be proof of concept. And Dr. Vladimir Cheromensky, who's the head of anatomy at the Plastinarium, has become a good close friend of mine. He, halfway through that, he said, actually, the dissection work is really good here. We could consider plastinating it. We just wanted to see that it could be done. We didn't know they were going to get plastinated.
Wow.
So then we went back 6 months later to position them. And that was the hardest part. And I found that the most exciting part was the positioning of the stuff that was plastinated. Dissection was fabulous. Because of my 3D mind, my graphics mind, I could design some of these things. So I could see what we could do. And we could see the routes as to how we would dissect for purpose, which was very different to usual dissection labs where you're dissecting an exploration and you keep going and taking the body to nothing. Here, you're preserving things and doing fascial sparing dissections and stuff like that. So anyway, that was a huge success. Me and my good colleague, Rochelle Clausen, got together and realized that the way that these specimens were going to be displayed in Berlin, which was a room bigger than my room here, and 9 pieces, they were just going to be put on a table. And we thought, we can't have that. We have to make the exhibition look like a Body World style exhibition. And I flew down to Berlin, measured up the room, then traveled on down to the Planetarium and saw the pieces as they were finished and designed all the stands that they're supposed to stand on.
Wow.
And then Body Worlds got behind it and said, actually, do you want to use some specimen pieces to go alongside your pieces to show the difference between topographical anatomy and how it looks fascially? And that's what we managed to create. And it was a huge success, bigger than we ever expected. And it was followed straight at that conference, which was the Berlin World Fascia Congress in 2018, was followed immediately by the World Congress of Osteopathy. So we kept the exhibition up for the osteopaths, and it was a major success for them as well. Because of that, we then got granted the permission to do a whole body. Now, that had never been tried before by the Planetarium, excuse me. And I had a meeting with Dr. Robert Schleip, Dr. Vladimir Chermensky, Angelina Wally, and various others about how we would do this. And at the same time, Dr. Chermensky and I were designing the body. And he designed it on a male form. I designed it on a female form. And we heard that it was going to be female. We blended our designs together. And then we became kind of joint designers of the project of Freya. And then we chose a team, and we had a team of 14 people from around the world. And these are the finest dissectors that you could probably ever work with, purely for this beautiful task that we had to go through. And I was kind of joint lead dissector with Dr. Chermensky. He would kind of come in and oversee, because what he said goes, it's his ship. And then I would manage the whole group. So I flew out there 36 times and spent, some best part of a month out there each time. And I'd have to then fly out there, do some work, run the group, fly back for a weekend and teach one of my course weekends in London, then fly back to Germany, for another weekend fly to Spain and teach, come back, fly to Stockholm and so on. So it was constantly like that. And through that period of time, we generated this incredible body. The positioning was the tricky bit, because we had lots of positioning problems that we had to change the initial design to get the positioning right. But working alongside them and the Planetarium team, never seen anything like it before in my life. These people were so fine. And working alongside Rochelle Clausen is probably one of the best teammates I've ever had in anything I've ever done. I mean, she's such a brilliant dissector. She's going to be one of the rising stars in the fashion world because of her understanding. And she runs a lab in San Diego now. And she's just got a great way of putting it all together in terms of understanding the dissection and the qualities of the tissue. So, but from that, we now have Freya in the world, and she's now on permanent exhibition in Berlin Body Worlds. And my vision initially in 2004 is that Body Worlds would have a room dedicated to fascia. And for the first time in history, it's being created. And hopefully now that would happen in other Body Worlds. They need to see whether this is successful in terms of the public viewing it until they create another one. But I now run my own dissections with my colleague Jahan Adem. So 2 of us have to do it as a team together there. They only will have 2 people together. And we do fascial focused dissections with functional movement understandings as well. So we do a lot of movement work alongside this at the Planetarium in Germany, and we do 2 a year. And we're pretty much booked up until sort of end of next year with it, really. Which is quite amazing.
Wow. I'm so happy and delighted and proud of you, Gary. And I will put all the links into the show notes, and I highly recommend to all the listeners to follow up and read and research and look out for Freya. And what I'm now really interested, maybe that's how we could wrap up, with doing what you did, this remarkable work you did in these past 5 years. What was the key message you took from it? Or how did that I'm sure it added a whole other layer of your own understanding of body and movement. That might be a whole other episode, but I have to ask.
Yeah, there would have to be another episode on that. We learned why the placentarium don't placenate so much fascia. And that really helped us understand the different qualities and properties within it and how it reacts to certain forces, just by experiential work without doing, the lab research on histology slides or samples and so on. But it's for all of us actually as a team, I think we were left in a very strange place after we'd finished, because it was a pinnacle of the work that we'd ever done. For me, it was, that was the pinnacle of everything I'd ever done in my world of this work. And we're kind of left not knowing what to do next for a while. But what I found, because as you know, and you've been on this, I run the 10-month myofascial anatomy course for movement teachers. And the content that's gone into that course has already extended it to 11 weekends now. Because of the learning from Freya. Freya's got 40 features in her that are about 2 hours each of learning. All of it from the current science and a couple of ideas that have come up from a few colleagues as well, which was Gil Headley and various others. But it's in terms of the differences within the tissues per person, it constantly confirms that. The quote from Van der Scaravelli is that go with the body and not against it. Keeps coming back whenever we go into any dissection work, because you keep seeing that if you go against the way the tissues are behaving, you end up in trouble, you get injury. So can we feel the quality of movement that we understand and go with the shapes of the body? And that is always the theme, because for me, can we maintain efficiency of the system so it can work appropriately within the field of gravity and not break down quickly and not maintain a state of stress? So it always wants to move towards parasympathetic. I've got to a certain age, my students are getting older with me, and they're interested now in longevity and how their body can be still vital and still important for them when they move around without it becoming limited and reducing their world. So, for me, understanding all of that has given me a different lease of life in a direction I didn't expect, which was, finding this liberation in the system to keep it moving really well so we can move better as we get older, rather than going through that kind of course where people start to get stiffer and get ill and stay like that for a long period of time. Can we maintain this moving system for as long as we can possibly do it? God willing, because I know things happen, but, we can create the best potential for it, always.
That's the best place to stop, Gary, to go with the body and not against it. And that's exactly what this whole podcast is about. And in the last couple of months, I also made this podcast about eating disorder recovery. And that's what that is about, learning to go with the body and not against it. And that's why we just all must learn about the fascination of the human body, in my opinion, because it's a liberating process. And I suggest I'll invite you again, and maybe we can go on from there, going, what does it mean to practice going with the body and not against it?
Absolutely. Let's do that. That would be fantastic to do.
Gary, I bow. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and passion and love for the work you do.
Oh, thank you. And thank you. And it's been fantastic to see you grow and blossom as well. You take care. Thank you very much.
What a wonderful and inspiring conversation. I'm so glad that Gary was with us. And now that I'm recording the outro for this episode, it's 2 weeks after I've spoken to Gary. I'm still so much moved by the discovery, or maybe the reminder, that we don't have to meet our body, but rather we have to create the conditions for my body, for our bodies to meet us. That has been such a light bulb moment. And I've been reflecting over the last 2 weeks, what does that mean? What could those conditions be? And I've noticed that for me as a woman, as a menstruating being, this has a lot to do with cycle awareness. And yes, here is a little spoiler alert. this early summer, I will have a whole bunch of cycle awakening guests awaiting to come to the podcast and to talk with me. So yeah, if that's a question you ponder about as well, if you are menstruating or not, what does that mean? What do we need to do so that body can meet us? Then do follow me on Instagram, on social media at Flurina_breathing_body, where I will keep you updated, and also where I will open the space for you to send in questions before I talk to those real cycle experts. And as always, leave a 5-star review, send and share with me your thoughts and comments, and share this podcast with the world. That's a huge support. Lots of love and take good care.